there, STEM middle schoolers at Baldwin Road. I'm Dr. Kristen Soupy. Yeah, I know that science teacher guy. Anyways, I'm coming at you live from Mirror Lake at The Ohio State University, where I teach psychology and neuroscience classes. I teach all about the brain, the behavior, the basics of psychology, and then I apply that a little bit to sleep. So in this video, I'm going to introduce you to some of my students and tell you a little bit more about all of the cool things that you can do with the future in psychology and neuroscience. I thought this might be a good time to introduce myself a little bit more and tell you a little bit more about my background and how I came to study psychology and neuroscience and what it means to teach those things at the Ohio State University. So I didn't really, know that this was a career option when I was a middle schooler sitting in the classrooms that you're sitting in. When I was a kid, I wanted to dig up dinosaur bones as a career. I thought that that was a totally viable career path. Jurassic Park was really big at the time and I was super into it. So I always had that scientific mindset. I eventually grew out of the dinosaur phase though and really settled into I want to be a teacher. I like talking to people. I like explaining things. I think that is totally what I want to do. The type of teacher I wanted to be changed over time until I was in college and I took my first neuroscience class. And I was just so excited. Like, studying was actually fun, and I really liked how we were trying to understand how this part of our body can be involved in so many different complicated things that we as people do. It just felt so cool to me. So I was hooked. And once I realized I could teach about the brain, I knew that that was what I wanted to do. I always had an interest in things like medicine, but I honestly do not have the stomach for surgery. So this is really cool because I get to train people who go on to be future doctors and researchers, but I'm not necessarily doing that myself. My strengths are really in the teaching and the communicating, and that's what brings me the most joy. So I want to go in the Wayback Machine. This is a picture that's actually in my high school yearbook, and it cracks me up because it's just so on brand that I'm holding up a colored picture of a human brain even in high school. So I was hooked pretty early. So when I was in middle school, like you are now, I liked school. I had a good time in school. I really liked my science classes. I really liked my English classes. My favorite classes were probably not math. I had to work a little bit harder in math. I appreciate them, but I admit that they weren't my favorite. I had to learn to love math as I got a little bit older. In high school, when we could kind of pick and choose based on our interests a little bit more, I had an awesome history teacher, and that really made me fall in love with history. Turns out I didn't love history as much when I didn't have an awesome history teacher. So that wasn't necessarily my favorite. I got to take my first psychology class in high school, and that was awesome. That was when I had my first taste of, this is what I want to do. I always thought psychology was only about the bad things, the illnesses, things like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. But once I realized psychology is so much more, including like how we think, how we learn, how we remember, how we speak, how we understand, why we pay attention to videos, how we're motivated to do certain things, I felt like psychology was a way to study like all of the things. I got to take an anatomy class, which was super cool. I actually really enjoyed doing some of the dissections and learning about the body. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that study hall was one of my favorites because I'm human. If I could go back and do it all over again, I wish someone had told me to take more computer science or computer programming. I don't really have a whole lot of skills in that area, and it's hugely in demand right now. Same thing with chemistry. I avoided chemistry, but it's a big part of neuroscience, and I wish I would have taken more. The type of math that we use the most is statistics, and you can never have enough statistics. It's really important in all kinds of different careers these days. So what's my job now? I have a degree, which is a PhD, so most of my students call me Dr. Soupy, and my job title is Associated Faculty at OSU. So that means I'm not really doing research anymore. I have done research, but I'm really focused on teaching. I teach a big variety of classes, including things like Intro to Psychology, behavioral neuroscience, which is really kind of learning more about the brain and how it connects to behavior. I've taught classes on sensation and perception, so if you like optical illusions or weird like auditory tricks, that is definitely a class for you someday. And the latest course I'm teaching is an advanced neuroscience course that's all about sleep, because everybody has a hard time with sleep, and it influences so much about how we're able to think and our mood and just all kinds of cool things. It's a cool way to study a lot of things. So I've really developed a big interest in sleep. And I want to talk a little bit about how I got here to basically be an instructor at The Ohio State University. I'm from Ohio. I went to college at Bowling Green State University. You can see me hanging out with Freddie Falcon here. And I was able to go to college because I earned an academic scholarship. And I know a lot of students may not know that that's a possibility, but I studied hard. I did pretty well on standardized tests that I had to take, and I did well enough that they helped pay for my tuition. So school now really can help pay off towards getting you on a path you want to be on. So in there, I decided that I wanted to major in psychology, and a major is basically picking the type of classes that you want to take and choosing what you want to get a degree in. So I went to BG, I got my major in psychology, got my degree, and then I immediately came to what's called graduate school, which is even more school after college, where I came to Ohio State and I got a couple more degrees. I got a master's degree and then a doctorate degree, both in psychology. Those are research focused, and while you're a student in grad school, you're getting paid to do research and to do your work. So it's not quite the same as being a student. But I do always like to say that I liked school so much I stuck around until about the 23rd grade. I want to take a second and talk about who the students are in all of those courses that I teach. To be totally honest, they're bigger versions of you. They're not that different from you. Shout out and hi to those of you who I've been able to meet before. But my students are students who are interested in STEM-related stuff. They're students who are curious. They're not necessarily the people who always did the best in the courses, but they were people who are willing to work hard towards a goal. They're people who are really strong and sticking to it, and people who are super motivated to help people in some way, shape, or form. So a lot of my students, almost all of them, are majoring or choosing that concentration in either psychology or neuroscience or both. Those fields are like super tight. There's a lot of overlap. Probably about half of my students these days want to work in healthcare in some way. So maybe they want to be a medical doctor, a nurse, or something like that. A lot of others want to work in mental health care, where maybe they're talking with people who have psychological disorders like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, obsessive compulsive disorder, like there's a whole lot. Or maybe they just want to help like normal people kind of check in and be the best, most healthy, well version of themselves. A lot of my students are interested in being researchers, where they conduct experiments and develop hypotheses and look at the data. And that could be applied in a lot of different ways. It could be just how do we understand more about things that we don't understand, because we still have a lot to learn about the brain. Or it could be applied like how do I design better medication to treat some of these conditions that we want to work with, or how do I find better treatments for these people to improve their quality of life in a lot of ways. A lot of my students are going to have jobs that don't exist today, and that's even more true for you because the field of neuroscience and psychology are changing so fast and we're learning so much. There's all kinds of really cool stuff happening with things like brain-machine interfaces and how our thoughts might be able to control robotic extensions so we can move machines with our mind, and it's so cool to think about where we're going to be in just a few years. A lot of my students might be interested in teaching, communicating with people, educating them about science and the brain and wellness and how all of these things work together. And with psychology and neuroscience, you have a lot of versatility where you can go into things like business. There's a whole arm of legal practice that's starting to bring in psychology and the neuroscience. Like if someone has brain damage, Are they held to the same legal responsibility as someone who doesn't have brain damage? We're seeing a lot more people get involved in government work, trying to lobby for certain laws to protect the rights of individuals or increase research funding. And so there's a lot of opportunities in psychology and neuroscience beyond just what you might think of. So I actually brought a few of my students with me, and I'll let a few of them introduce themselves to you and tell you kind of where they're hoping to go and what motivates them.
Hey everyone, my name is Maria Sanchez-Boido. I am a second year at The Ohio State University studying neuroscience. I'm not exactly sure how I want to apply it. I really want to understand the biological and chemical basis of behavior so I can ultimately use that to better understand my clients as a clinical psychologist or to better understand legal clients as an attorney. I am a big proponent of studying what you want to study just because you're interested in it, because your interests will eventually line up. When I went into a neuroscience major, I knew I didn't want to go to med school, which is a typical route. So just study what you want to study and your interests will take you to your career. Also, if you're a neuro major, you get cool neuroscience stuff. So yeah, best of luck, guys.
Hi everybody, I'm a neuroscience major with a minor in communications. I want to go into neuromedical device sales, so basically I'd just be selling medical devices to doctors and physicians, and my piece of advice is in the medical field there are endless possibilities, so don't feel like you have to confine yourself to a small box. Branch out.
Hi, my name is Maggie Lang and I am a junior neuroscience major at The Ohio State University. I'm studying to be a pediatric physician's assistant in neuroscience, which is basically a doctor, but just the lower level than a doctor. My biggest piece of advice is that if you don't really know what you want to do yet, it's okay and you have absolutely tons of time to figure it out.
Hi guys, I'm Ryan. I'm a third year neuroscience major here at Ohio State University. I am studying to become a surgeon of some kind, don't know yet, possibly plastics, possibly neuro, that would make the most sense. My advice would be that college is not just coming here to study and do work all the time. It is a great way to find yourself and meet new people that have similar interests to you, and you will have a great time here. Cheers!
Hi everyone, my name is Emily. I'm a third year neuroscience major here at Ohio State. I want to study to be a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. And my advice to you would be to explore and don't limit yourself to like the subjects that you just like. I would say try new things and try out different things because you never know what you'll be interested in.
Hello guys, I'm Nicholas. I'm a senior here at Ohio State studying neuroscience, and I want to be a doctor. I'm really interested in sleep, so maybe a sleep doctor. I have some advice for you guys. If you're interested in going to college, it's a lot of years ahead of you. So my advice is to take every day, day by day. Just try to learn a little bit each day and get a little bit better each day and enjoy each day, and you are on your way to success.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and I am a fourth year neuroscience student at Ohio State University. I'm studying to become a pediatric neurologist after I go to med school, so I want to help kids with brain diseases kind of feel their best. And I'm also a Spanish minor, and I'm in an a cappella group, and my advice is to explore things outside of STEM as well. I found that a lot of my passions lie within STEM, but a lot lie without it, and you can kind of have a diversity of things you're involved in to kind of make you a more well-rounded person and have different things that interest you outside of just your major.
Hopefully you're starting to feel inspired by some of the possibilities in psychology and neuroscience. Let's go take a look at an actual human brain and learn a little bit about some of the anatomy. Grab a metaphorical coat and some gloves and follow me down to the lab. Next, we're going to look at a real human brain specimen. So let's go ahead and pull out a whole human brain here. So right now we're looking at the frontal lobe of the brain, and you can see the two different cerebral hemispheres. You can see the cerebellum and the brainstem here, some of the other nerves and blood vessels attached to it. Over here, you can see some of the covering of the brain that helps protect it, the meninges. So let's come in and get a closer look of that. So here is a close-up view of a real human brain specimen. We don't know anything about the donor. We don't know if they were male or female, how old they were, what they died of, anything about them, but we are thankful to have this specimen for educational purposes. So now let's take a look at another view. This is a brain that's been cut in half so we can see some of the internal structures. Here you can see the corpus callosum, the pons area of the brainstem, midbrain, thalamus, hypothalamus, cingulate cortex, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe would be over here. Here's the occipital lobe. And this is a tail end of the spinal cord. So what you can see are all of the different nerve fibers that would go down towards the leg, and the covering around this is the meninges. This is where an epidural might happen if you have one of those for a medical procedure, so we'll zoom in on that so you can see the texture. And that's a human brain. Hi everybody. Before we move on, I think it's really important that I take some time to talk to you about some brain myths. These are out there, these are common, and if you learn nothing else, please learn how to stop these myths from spreading and do your part for general brain common sense. So how many of these have you heard before, and how many of them have you believed? So there's a myth out there that bigger brains are smarter. And this one gets complicated. If you are comparing across species, this is sort of true. And the way it works is there's something sort of true. An elephant has a bigger brain than us, right? But it's not necessarily smarter than us. What matters the most between species is a specific ratio of how big the brain is relative to the size of the body. And when you compare the elephant's brain to its body size, all of a sudden it's not so impressive. This is where humans really shine. We are in first place as far as brain to body size ratio. Second place is dolphins, just in case you were curious. If you're looking within a species, it turns out there is not actually a correlation between brain size and intelligence. So, when you're ready to shop for a graduation hat, that does not come, bigger hats do not automatically go to different degrees, right? So remember that within a species, bigger brains or brain size, not so helpful. So you may have heard of this one. This is probably one of the single most enduring myths in all of psychology, and it's terrible, it's wrong. Stop it now. And this is the myth that we only use 10% of our brain. And some of you may recall that dear Scarlett Johansson and Morgan Freeman made a movie a couple of years ago based entirely on this premise. A couple of years before that, Bradley Cooper tried to make a movie as well. So the movies Lucy and Limitless are not the best we have to offer in terms of psychological science. I want to talk about why people believe this myth. First of all, it's really appealing to think that there's some sort of unlocked potential within us, that if only we could unlock it, we could do all the things better. That appeals to our sense of growth. When we look at the way brain scan images are presented in the media, if we look at something like an fMRI scan, it typically shows most of the brain in gray, and then it highlights a couple of regions of interest in bright colors. People have a tendency to see those bright colors and think that that's the only area that's active, but it's the area that changed. The other areas may have been at their peak activation levels already, so they haven't gone down, they just haven't changed, and so they're not noted in those sorts of diagrams. The entire brain is active all the time. if you only use 10% of your brain, you would be in a very, very tragic state. So that one is a huge myth. Another persistent one is, and I always think this is funny because I will have, usually in a class of like 100, I'll have maybe 5 to 6 people have this on the back of their laptop as a cover showing the left brain, right brain, where the left brain is very logical and the right brain is very creative. And then I start talking about this in class, and you can see them kind of like look to the side and start like pulling their laptop down so other people can't see it. This idea of left brain and right brain personality is really pervasive. Again, we like our simple explanations. We like the boxes that we can fall into neatly, and most of us feel like we can categorize ourselves as being more one or the other. But here's the trick about personality. It's kind of a big thing. It's not using only half of your brain. There are specific functions that are lateralized more to one side or the other. Like when we talk about language, Broca's area and Wernicke's area are almost always in the left hemisphere if you're a right-handed individual. If you're a left-handed individual, there's maybe a 5% chance that they're not, but that's why left-handed people are described as sinister, which is a synonym for evil. Dr. McGinty's left-handed, so I just like to throw that one in there. So anyways, that left brain, right brain personality, that's a myth. This one is a little bit more innocent. So the number that's often reported is we have 100 billion brain cells. I feel like that's close enough to 86 billion. We just like our nice big round numbers. They're easier for us to remember. Another myth is that drugs will put holes in your brain. This is usually associated with ecstasy more than any other drug, but I've seen it with a few. And drugs can cause all kinds of long-term consequences in terms of the neurotransmitters that are available and the type of connections. But just so we're clear, it's not like literally putting holes in your brain. Still probably not the safest choice, but not putting actual holes in your brain. And then this last myth says we have 5 senses. And I look forward to talking to you about this a little bit more when we talk about sensation and perception, but this always cracks me up because there was that movie a few years ago, The Sixth Sense, that was all about how the sixth sense is this extrasensory perception. This is the whole I see dead people movie. Well, we probably have about 20 senses. You can think of the 5 basic ones that you learn in preschool, but we also have balance and pain and proprioception, which is knowing where our muscles and our joints are. We have the position of knowing when our head is moving. We have all kinds of other senses. We have entire sensory systems devoted to temperature, for example. So there's a lot more going on there, and it's a lot more complicated than it might look. I want to give you a little bit of neuroscience knowledge that maybe you can take home and use to impress your families. Maybe you have heard this. This is another myth. The idea that eating turkey makes you tired. Have you heard this? Maybe you've experienced this, particularly after a Thanksgiving dinner where it seems like a whole lot of people just want to lay around and maybe take a nap. They just feel more tired than usual. So a lot of people started trying to use neuroscience to explain this phenomenon that almost everybody have noticed. And there's a chemical in turkey that's called tryptophan. And there's a whole lot of chemical stuff on here, but don't necessarily get scared of it. So what we're looking at here is a chemical pathway of compounds that are all related to each other. And tryptophan is one of the starting points on that pathway. Other things on that pathway, chemicals that are related, are things like serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter you might have heard of, and melatonin, which is a hormone that's really important, that's released during darkness, and it's a signal to help our body know that it's time to fall asleep. So tryptophan usually comes up around Thanksgiving because it's supposed to be really high in turkeys, so eating more turkey is what makes everyone sleepy because of this chemical called tryptophan. But let me show you some data. This is an example of how we can use science to answer questions about the brain and behavior and kind of bring it all back. So here we're looking at a graph, and we're looking at the amount of tryptophan in different foods. So you can see potatoes are pretty small, a little more in eggs, looking at salmon over here, beef, and kind of right in the middle of the pack is turkey. But we can keep going and find a whole lot of foods that have higher tryptophan than turkey, like pork, Parmesan cheese, soybeans, another type of fish, cod, and spirulina. So turkey really isn't the highest in tryptophan. So how did this myth get started? Well, people are definitely tired after a large meal, especially Thanksgiving, that has a lot of turkey. But think for a minute about the other food that is typically on the table as part of a Thanksgiving meal. I know in my family, I'm all about the pumpkin pie and the mashed potatoes, and think about your food that you like in your family. And a lot of it is probably pretty heavy on starch or carbohydrates. And so all those different side dishes have a huge amount of carbohydrates, which causes our energy to get really high, but then we crash and we feel more tired after the fact. People thought that tryptophan might be a good explanation because it can eventually become melatonin, which can help us fall asleep. But turkey really isn't that high compared to a lot of other foods that we eat on a regular basis. The much better explanation is how much food we're eating and the different types of food and how a lot of them have a tendency to be carbs. That's why we feel tired after a Thanksgiving meal with lots of turkey. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to me talk a little bit about psychology and neuroscience, some of the cool things you can do with a career in this field. Thanks so much for following along as we looked at a real human brain specimen, and I hope you go out there and continue to spread the truth about some of those neuroscience myths, including the turkey myth. I had a lot of fun making this for you. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with Mr. Soupy in 6th grade science. Until then, please have a great day, go Bucks, and go Raiders!